Hello, welcome to MEMO Conversations. I'm Osman Butter, video producer. My guest today is Melis Hafez. Melis Hafez is an associate professor at the Virginia Commonwealth University. She received her PhD in history from UCLA. Her book, Inventing Laziness, The Culture of Productivity in Late Ottoman Society, came out from Cambridge University Press in 2021. Melis, welcome to MEMO Conversations.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
And it's our pleasure to have you. So I think we should start right, obviously, at the beginning. You know, there's all sorts of things in the world you could study to do with history, to do with empire. What drew you to want to study laziness and productivity in the late Ottoman Empire?
Thank you for this great question. It's great because it makes me think about the earlier phases of my work on laziness. And as you know, as soon as I utter that word, the phrase, I know that it is very oxymoronic, work on laziness. At the beginning of my studies, I was randomly reading Ottoman cultural products from the 19th century. And something I found striking was the fact that regardless of the diversity of these, cultural products, ranging from novels to pamphlets, reform bills to morality books, textbooks, petitions, through all that diversity, I realized that there was the centrality of the issue of productivity, issue of work and efficiency. And for me, that was something striking that, connected all these, cultural products to each other, this certain anxiety about, work and the valuation of work. And this is, the way they formulated, the way they talked about work was not merely as an individual matter, but it was, it was not even an economic matter. It was also a moral matter. It was a national matter. And they talked about laziness, not merely as an individual condition, but as a national problem, as a social disease that each and every member of the nation, of the emerging Ottoman nation, has to fight, has to defeat on a daily basis. And this kind of a formulation was striking for me because I mean, we are very familiar with this language, right? In the 21st century, this is something that we are, imbued with, this kind of an, understanding of work as an indicator of value, and not only personal value or social value, but also national value. And the way they talked about laziness is something that is strikingly similar to our codification of laziness as something that you have to defeat in yourself, in your home, in your institution, in your nation. And once I saw this similarity, and I don't want to collapse, of course, the 19th century processes with the 21st century processes, because the dynamics of the capitalist market economy has changed drastically, but these notions, these meaning universes came to being in the 19th century. That these the way we understand and value work and productivity and efficiency and demonize laziness has a history. And this history definitely includes this, concept of, laziness, right? And the word, even the word is it's the code word, right? When we think about, how laziness is used in our worlds and in the 19th century as well, it's a code word for structuring difference, right? Structuring difference on a national level, right? We are the nation of we are a productive nation and they are not, right? Structuring difference on a class level, which is something we are, quite familiar with in the 21st century still, that, the poor is poor because they are lazy. If they could just work harder, right? definitely disregarding all the systemic inequalities of the capitalist system, this, conceptualization of, poverty, this, identification of poverty with laziness. And even more so, I mean, there's national and class differences, but also, structuring racial differences. Some races are believed to be, inherently lazy. They are not even, they cannot be even reformed, right? And this opens up to all levels of subjugation, right? This understanding of, laziness as structuring difference, justification for many levels of subjugation, including colonialism and, this the civilizational approach, the usage of the civilizational approach. So when I saw these, very modern formulations of work and also consciousness of the value of work, not merely, whatever work is, but the consciousness about the value of work. When I saw these similarities, I thought, this could be something quite interesting to look at, to be able to see the dynamic, to be able to, understand the dynamics of change and transformation that are taking place within the Ottoman Empire in connection with the global changes, but something that, looking at this, the construction of this dynamic binary between work and laziness, and who is labeled lazy, right? These are quite vague terms. Who is considered, to be productive? That kind of establishment of that binary would reveal so many intricacies, dynamics of an Ottoman transformation that is both Ottoman and modern at the same time. So this is how I started, thinking about this issue, and ended up writing a book on it.
Yes, it was a very interesting read. As you know, I obviously went through it. But before we sort of go further into laziness and productivity, the idea, it's sort of, as you say in your book, it's sort of coated in the rise of, well, not so much rise, but sort of a rise. I mean, the fact is that you have this genre of literature which you analyze in your book, which is, I think the rough English translation would be something like advice literature, right? And in the past, you point out that advice literature looked at the failings of, policies in the Ottoman Empire as being the faults of institutions and elites and specific things, and rarely do everyday people come into it, unless it's to talk about ways that they've suffered from particular policies. But in the 19th century, we see a massive shift towards more discussion about people's everyday morality and why, bad morality leads to bad outcomes. So could you perhaps talk to us about this genre of literature that came in the 19th century? What is it? What is morality? Tell us about it.
Oh, this is a great question. And I don't think you're wrong about, talking about this rise. There's something, interesting about them. I call them morality texts. They come in a variety of formats. They come in, books that are titled morality, that they come in, in the 19th century, they come in, in the forms of novels and plays. As well, but I call them, morality texts in general. You're talking about a rise. The interesting thing about these morality texts, they go back for, multiple millennia. It's a very established, if I may say so, traditional genre with all its own dynamics throughout different, historical periods. But when it comes to the 19th century, there's just something is very old and very transformative at the same time. In the content, the format, the authors, there's so many levels of change, at the same time continuity. I mean, when I started looking at these texts, I realized that I recognized so many differences, changes from the earlier formulations of what morality is. As I advanced, I realized there are so many different continuities as well. And the 19th century moralists, in my case, the Ottoman moralists, and morality is a global issue in the 19th century. So it's not only the Ottomans that are, Americans are, producing so many morality books, quite secular looking, at the same time, it's different. It is very difficult to look at these texts and talk about them as traditional or secular. They're just, they defy these binaries, and they actually help us understand that these binaries are not functioning anymore. There is this in the historiography, there's this disregard for the morality texts produced in the until recently, I should say, but until recently, these books came up in the books of history by historians as elements of tradition, like continuity, purely purely formulating age-old maxims, and at best, at worst, they are defending the traditional values against westernizing forces. But I think it has to do a lot with the current emphasis on morality, conservative emphasis on morality, that these historians just did not see how transformed this genre is, how it combined new and old discourses, and it produced so many new ideas. Or maybe I shouldn't say produce, but it became a genre within which many new ideas are articulated. But once we go past that kind of assumptions of conservatism that's colored by our understanding of morality today, we see so many dynamic changes in the genre of morality. This is actually my second book project, so I shouldn't go into the entire genre discussion here, but let me start with the numbers, right? There were like around 150 morality books produced in the last 50 years, 60 years of the empire. So these are, amazing numbers. Although, the genre has been very popular in the early modern era, one of the most, popular genres, morality books, you have it next to your Quran, how to improve yourself. The involvement with the morality issues, writing morality texts is going to explode in the 19th century. The authors are quite different, right? They are not these highly erudite, intellectual, scholarly members of scholarly community. Very few of them in the 19th century are members of the ulama, the scholarly, Islamic scholarly community. Many of them are just, mid-rank bureaucrats and teachers, secondary school teachers, or doctors, soldiers, they wrote these, morality books. I have a good example for you, especially for the audiences in the UK. Ali Kemal, a name that might be familiar to you as the great-grandfather of Boris Johnson. Ali Kemal wrote a morality book. He's a very famous or infamous politician, polemician, what else? A statesman as well. So in his early 20s, he wrote a morality book. So it gives you an idea that, many different, members of the Ottoman educated classes wrote, at one point in their lives, wrote morality books. When I said, there are 150, let me just explain that 150 in Ottoman Turkish using the Arabic alphabet, Ottoman alphabet. We have to factor in, I didn't do this in my book. I hope to do this in my coming book. We have to factor in all these different languages that are, being spoken in the multilingual Ottoman Empire, and I don't think I can do that. It's beyond my abilities, but I want to explore also the books written on morality within in Turkish using different alphabets like Armenian and Greek alphabets. So if we factor them in, actually numbers are even greater than 150. They're important for this project. They're important because they revealed to me the major, articulations of what I call moralization of work and productivity. And these books contain a massive reformulation of old terms in a very modern way, and they also introduced new terms in a very old way as well. So they combined these, what through a very binaristic approach, what you see as traditional and modern, but they brought together these variety of different concepts together, and they articulated through these notions. They articulated a very strong language of moralization of productivity. I like to talk about the change in the format as well, because that's gonna also contribute to the understanding of the concept of civic duty, of work as a civic duty. The early modern morality books were based on virtue ethics. I mean, there are vices that you have to stay away from, that you have to cleanse yourself from, and there are virtues. And you have to obtain a golden mean. This is called golden mean ethics. That goes back to the Greek ethics. In the 19th century, although the genre is the same, they stay away from that virtues and vices. I mean, it still continues, but they organize these books, the moralists of the Ottoman Empire, they organize these books based on the concept of duty. So there are duties to self, okay, understandable, duties to society, duties to the state, something that you don't get to see in the earlier versions. In the early modern period morality texts, duty does not appear, almost doesn't appear. The concept of duty is a very 19th century concept. So within that shift, they articulate work as not only an individual duty, but as a social duty, as a national duty. At the same time, it is an Islamic duty. So it's just bringing all of these, different justifications or, strengthening methods together. And laziness is not only a personal vice that you have to fight against. It's not a condition, personal condition. It's, it's a national problem that each and every member has to defeat in themselves, around themselves, in their institutions, something that, very familiar to us in the 21st century. And within this concept of, duty, they talk about their duty, the moralist duty of eradicating laziness from the national scene. So this is something that is quite new when you think about the 19th century context. And they talk about these in a very exclusionary way. The label of lazy, right, whom they identify as lazy. I mean, there are so many articulations of exclusionary languages that will keep operating even after the empire's collapse.
You mentioned, obviously, the fact that what we might today can term sort of conservative morality, or, conservative ideas of morality, giving rise to, in the guise of it being conservative morality, actually giving rise to transformation of entire concepts. And in the book, you actually do talk a little bit about how certain, let's say, religious and Islamic concepts, which have been around for a long time, subtly start to change, and in some cases, bigger changes start to happen with them in regards to work and laziness and the impact it has. So could you perhaps give us some more examples of that? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So as this shift took place in the morality texts away from virtues and vices, kind of a morality to duty-based morality. We start seeing, all these, what you would identify as Islamic norms appearing. Some of them are just praises for, for doing good work, whatever, that means, right? They employ it's interesting because, most of these books are very Ottomanist in their outlook. I mean, of course, it depends on who wrote it and what, decade they were written, and the position or political position of the person, of the, author in a given decade, because it also changes. But they talk about this, these Islamic notions that they argue that are misunderstood, right? Resignation, right? You entrusting your work to God. And they try to reformulate it by arguing that, resignation doesn't mean laziness, or, the saying of the Prophet, al-faqru fakhri, that laziness is my pride. And they take pages and pages arguing against the immediate understanding, or what they call the misunderstanding of this concept. It is not, laziness meaning, being poor. It's not poverty in the sense of being poor. It is poverty as opposed to the, the power of, the greatness of God. So they try to reformulate these. And when they're doing these reformulations, they also add new concepts. They Islamicize and moralize new concepts. Money is, time is money. It appears in these books that it is actually a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, which is not, which is a very 19th century concept, right? Time is money. So they take these, I don't want to say use, because this is their outlook. This is their understanding of the world, and they want to, this is their understanding of their own religion. And they are articulating these, meanings that are very new, but to them that are very vital for the survival of their nation and the survival of the Ottoman state, and the eradication of laziness as, as a hindrance to progress.
Yes, and so when we think about the ways in which these new concepts transform Ottoman society, I think, in the book you talk a lot about how, people's everyday lives are being, this is not just something that's happening among a few officials or whatever. It is something that's actually transforming the empire, the way people spend their time, how time is thought about, but also, systems are put in place to incentivize work. So could you perhaps talk to us a little bit how the state incentivizes people to work more?
Yeah, this is another great question. First you have to make everyone believe that they have been lazy for centuries. That they have to put, put forward the hard, their hard work and change the fate of not only their own, lives, but change the fate of their empire. That it is actually the duty of each and every member of the Ottoman nation to, shoulder this burden. This is just an amazing language, because, this is going to continue into our 20th century, 21st century, this understanding of civic duties. In the book, in a very detailed way, how can I make this work boring? I looked at the bureaucratic reforms, but I looked at the bureaucratic reforms, thankfully, not as an institutional historian, but as a cultural historian. So I wasn't concerned about, if the bureaucratic reforms that were implemented worked or not, but how the bureaucratic reforms advanced or made even more pervasive this anxiety about laziness all across the empire. So let me talk about the Ottoman, state, to the changes that the Ottoman state went through in the 19th century. Ottoman Empire has always been a bureaucratic state, right? But in the 19th century, the state structures are going to along the lines of modern state, bureaucracy is going to centralize. Thousands of more people, as opposed to the 18th century, are going to be employed by the state. And this is something interesting, because when we think about, state employees, we're talking about a very large group of people, especially after the 1870s, very large group of people who are coming from diverse backgrounds all across the empire, from a variety of different, confessional groups. So, the state employee is not usually, we think about these effendis in Istanbul, but then we have all these, people who are employed by the state in a corner of Syria, in a corner of Anatolia, who are just, who only have like 5 years of education, who knows how to read and write, and employed by the state, but has never seen Istanbul, has never seen a major city maybe. So there's, that kind of a pervasiveness of the bureaucratic, pervasiveness of the anxiety about work through these, offices throughout the empire. I looked at these and I wondered, how did it affect the daily lives of these, bureaucrats of various ranks? How did it affect their daily life? How did it affect their understanding of what work is and what, laziness is? Because these are very elastic terms, and they're going to use it to their advantage for sure. With the expansion of the bureaucracy, we start seeing all these, reform bills and codes and memorandums being sent all over the empire, that the productivity has to be increased, efficiency has to be increased, laziness is actually now a crime. Again, very vague, but I call this, criminalization of laziness in the bureaucratic offices. These laws and reforms had teeth. I found more than 100 people, in the archives, that are removed from their posts for being lazy. Of course, you cannot take these at face value, but this is the official language for not being efficient. And couple of things. It's really hard to summarize all these, changes that are taking place in the bureaucratic offices and how it is connected to larger cultural transformations. But I like to highlight two things. One, these concepts, how negotiated these concepts were. Within the bureaucratic system, we have these, control mechanisms being established after 1870s. These control mechanisms are going to, mete out all these punishments for those who are, committing laziness in the offices. But we hear back from the bureaucrats, and no one wants to be called lazy. And even those who are called lazy, who are labeled lazy, are never lazy when it comes to, saying no to these labels. They write petitions, they write letters to the state inspection offices, and they claim that they've never been lazy. They're actually hard workers, but it is, the workload, this, irrational amount of workload. So we see how, these concepts are not merely, distributed from top down, but also negotiated, and they're reinstated back to their positions. Some of them. Most of them are going to come back to their position. So it shows us how these concepts are negotiated. And the second one has to do more with the larger cultural transformations. When I found out that most of the authors of morality books were at one point in their lives were members of the Ottoman bureaucracy, I realized the connection between moralization of work and bureaucratization of work as well, right? The connection between the field of morality, how it changed, and the field of bureaucracy and how that changed. The connection is quite interesting, because it gives us how a very pragmatic state reform of eradicating, a perceived laziness in the offices increased the anxiety about laziness that's already circulating in the public sphere, and made these moralists experience it in their daily lives. One of the morality book authors was an inspector, for instance. So he was just, meting out these punishments to his, fellow employees. So that connection between those who wrote morality texts and those who were, day in and day out experienced the anxiety about laziness. This kind of connection makes us realize that there's something very Ottoman about these transformations, that these guys who wrote morality books didn't do that because they, went to Europe and they saw how productive these, Europeans are, and they admired the cities. They experienced this very modern anxiety about laziness and work in the context of the Ottoman reforms by partaking within the Ottoman reforms. And that actually is something that I found to be quite interesting and eye-opening when we think about the larger Ottoman transformations.
Yes, and today in the Middle East, how have, where are we today with the, because you were obviously mentioning, particularly at the start of your book, when you mention what topic you're sort of studying, people sort of think that you're like, oh, okay, so you're going to tell us how things got so, why everyone is so lazy here. And there's sort of two reactions. Obviously, from the outside world, from Westerners, there's this obviously perception people in the Middle East are lazy. But what's interesting about this perception is a lot of Middle Easterners themselves think they're lazy as well. At least think other people around them are pretty lazy. So with that sort of in mind, what is the legacy of cultural productivity in the Middle East and the world today?
Another amazing question, and I am not sure if I can respond in a comprehensive or way, but of course, with these, with the culture of productivity comes with this understanding that this internalist, from the perspective of the residents of the Middle East, this internalist understanding of why we are here today. By that I mean, they see it as something that the regions of the Middle East have done something wrong. Of course, this totally disregards the inherent inequalities of the capitalist world system that has, subjugated these regions. Although, there's so much negotiation and so much resistance and so much transformations taking place in the region, but it is for sure starting sometime early in the 19th century, these regions have become marginalized by the center of the capitalist world system. So that's, once you disregard these, global structures of inequality, you are left with this, more moralized way of approaching what went wrong, a very Louisian way of asking that question. And of course, this is you have to also identify the impetus of reform. In these questions, like why are we lazy, or how do we get out of being lazy, is also a language of reform that has been, circulating at least in the last 70 years of the Ottoman Empire. It's, to be able to introduce or implement new reforms, you have to also believe that you have done something totally wrong. So there's that, understanding of having this motor of reform in these languages is also something that I have to acknowledge here. When we talk about the legacy of these reforms, we can think about multiple processes that are taking place in 20th and 21st centuries. For sure, the culture of productivity, with all its exclusionary aspects, its moralizing aspects, its internalist critique, has survived the Ottoman Empire, has outsurvived the Ottoman state structure. So we can see that it contributed to the 20th century state reforms of what historians call the ethos of developmentalism. It contributed to the nationalistic discourses, heavily contributed to the nationalistic discourses in the post-imperial period. I can think of examples from the Republic of Turkey. I recited as a grade school child in the 80s, 1980s, a pledge, what is called the Our Pledge, Andımız, Our Pledge. And this is how it starts. I'm Turkish, I'm honest, I'm industrious. So the second qualification after the declaration of being Turkish, whatever that means, is being industrious. Of course, you have to understand how exclusionary this is when you think about the turbulence that the Ottoman Empire's last decades went through, all the violent eradication of age-old communities from the lands that became the Republic of Turkey, all the minorities in every sense. They had to recite this for decades. Hopefully not anymore, but it can come back anytime. So they had to recite this kind of a nationalized discourse of productivity as making it a component of a certain nation and excluding everyone else. Of course, you have to realize that 19th century exclusionary discourses were vague, but they opened these they made these contexts, historical realities possible. Going back to the Turkish case, in the early Republican period, for instance, the question of who is lazy and who is idle, right, was the answer to that question was given in a very definitive way, right? So what institutions are considered to be producing not the culture of productivity, but culture of laziness. And with that kind of writing into, blasphemous language, in the early decades of the Republican period, Turkey, madrasas were abolished. Sufi lodges were abolished because they are, written into that blasphemous language. And, seeing these as merely Republican doings is just cutting the 19th century roots from it. In the 30s, for instance, Turkish radio or national radio in Turkey banned Ottoman-style music, and with the justification that very very 19th century justification, right? Justification that it produces laziness, it induces laziness. So Ottoman music was banned for almost like a year and a half from the national radio with this kind of a justification that that kind of a justification, that language has been circulating around for at least 7 years, but answers are very radical and very drastic and draconian in the Republican era. So we definitely see these, changes and continuities within this culture of productivity and how it is, used to justify abolition of certain institutions or marginalization of certain groups within a given nation state.
Yes, it's an interesting topic, really, because obviously, it does carry on to the Republic as you've sort of illustrated, and even if the sort of language around it changes slightly, it's the same basic thing that comes in the 19th century. But I do sort of have a question of mine, which I want to ask as my second to last question, and then we'll go on to the last one, which is, this may be a bit too big a question, but in what differences do you actually see between the way Turks and Turkish historians understand, Turkish history, particularly in the early Republican period, from the way outsiders make sense of it. And I was thinking about this because the way it's sort of told to us, for example, take, for example, the azan, right, which is traditionally was done in Arabic, but then in the early Republican period, it was changed to Turkish, right? That was part of the early reforms, and it's not until the 50s it comes back in. And the way that we sort of, people on the outside world have understood it as this was specifically a secularist anti-Islam move by the Turkish state. But when I was talking to a Turkish friend about it, she had a very different understanding of it. She was said to me, oh, we didn't really think of it as an anti-Islam thing. We saw it as an anti-Arab thing specifically. So I'm sort of wondering about the divergence of discourses here. I mean, you don't have to comment on that particular example, but are there like ways that that sort of comes out to you?
I mean, I don't think you're wrong, and I don't think she's wrong either. I mean, there are so many different elements that play into that kind of a radical Turkification. So radical Turkification, I mean, you've seen this in the modernity discourses in Iran as well, that, cutting out the, of course, these are quite new ways of formulating, cutting out the Arab components of Islam. And this is something that you see in the 1980s Turkey as well, like, well, this quite infamous Turkish, Islamic Turkish synthesis. It's not merely Islamic, it's not merely Turkish, whatever these concepts mean, of course, but a combination. This is something that's, that became structured in the 1980s, so quite recent. Yes, there are, of course, with the Republican period, we have this discourse that this is a radical break, whatever that has come before, that has been, invalidated. It didn't work. I mean, for my new, book, I'm looking at this concept of cosmopolitanism. So it has nothing to do with Arabness. It has nothing to do with Islam. But the term cosmopolitanism is used as a bad word, right? Pejorative word, not merely a pejorative word, but as something that you have to steer away from. So Ottoman Empire has been cosmopolitan. It has been Islamic. It hasn't. It has been, ruled by Sharia. It wasn't ruled by Sharia, right? So it's just this kind of a revolutionary language that we are introducing something new, and what has been there before has been proven wrong. So with that kind of a revolutionary discourse, I'm not saying it was revolutionary, but how it was constructed to be revolutionary, comes with extreme Turkification, the more ethnic conceptualization of Turkishness, and a stance against an Ottoman Islam, or an Islam altogether. But again, you have to understand this in the context of post-World War I anti-Arab discourses as well, that, now they are no longer, I mean, there are new books that talk about how it was a possibility in the 1920s that Turkey and Syria would be, one federated state. But historiography does not even dwell on that, as if, 1916 with the, so-called Arab revolt, all of a sudden, all the bridges were just burned between the two supposedly distinct nations. But the historiography wants, the early Republican historiography, especially, produced until recently, wants you to believe in that kind of a break, rather than the continuity, or rather than alternatives that could have been quite historically possible. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, it's an interesting area, because of course I think people today forget, because even in Arab countries, Syria, Iraq, they tend to think of the break as well, don't they? I mean, they think, it was Syria, Syrian Arab nationalism, or it was Iraq. But, even up until the 1920s, a lot of the ones in the Syrian revolt in the 1920s, some of them thought they were going to join Turkey, right? They revolted. And there were Christian Arabs in Syria who were revolting, thinking they would join Turkey and become part of Ataturk's state, but never did, because when Ataturk sort of indicated he wasn't interested, then they went to Syrian nationalism. And up until, the revolts among the Kurds, much of northern Iraq could have been part of Turkey at one point as well. It's a rich area. But I was also thinking, when you were talking about the Turkification process, the way in which Islamic scholars in Turkey responded to this, because I interviewed Philip Dorrell, I think his name Philip Dorrell, last year or the year before, and he's done this whole study on Turkishnization of Islamic discourses. And one of the things he noticed is that Turkish scholars became very interested in Imam al-Mutaridi, who's from Central Asia. And part of the reason why they were so interested in him is that because he was Central Asian, he might have been a Turk. And so they're being patriotic by referring to him. But it sort of leads into our last question, you've already started to talk about, which is, what are you working on now? What is coming up for you? But what you were saying is also kind of interesting, because you find attacks against cosmopolitanism everywhere, right? You find attacks on cosmopolitanism in the Soviet Union, even against certain groups. You can talk about, they would accuse, say, Jewish people in the Soviet Union of being rootless cosmopolitans. And even in political discourses in America, it's like, when you've got a Republican administration, they sort of accuse liberals of being too cosmopolitan and not in touch with the real America. So it is something that exists here too. I'm wondering then if you could tell us a little bit about your work coming up.
Yeah, I just want to say something about cosmopolitanism. I mean, it's also a trope, right? This idea that there was this cosmopolitan world, whatever value you attach to it, with equal footing. We know that things happen in the Ottoman Empire that defies this rosy picture of cosmopolitanism. So I wasn't, I wasn't, how do I say this? I wasn't promoting cosmopolitanism, because I don't, it is a problematic term that has to be, thought upon and not taken as a metaphor. Thank you for asking about my current project, because I started already talking about it. Once I finished this book on the culture of productivity, I realized that there's so much to think about in the realm of morality. I looked at it from the moralization of discourses of moralization of work, and it became a major source for at least for 2 chapters of my book. But now I want to shift my focus to a cohort of moralists, and one of them is Ali Kemal, a cohort of moralists, and how they had different backgrounds, different ideologies, different ethno-linguistic, ethno-confessional backgrounds, and how they had a variety, sometimes conflictual understandings of a political, moral world. So, and I want to, situate maybe several cohorts, I'm not sure about that, these cohorts of moralists, and loosely defined, right? Moralists in the institutional history of the Ottoman Empire, in the last maybe 30 years of the Ottoman Empire. So this is something I think, because this understanding of citizenship, moralization of citizenship, and politicization of morality is still very vibrant today. So I want to explore the formative years of that kind of a moralization of citizenship and a politicization of morality, going back to the back to the 19th century.
Melis Hafez, thank you for talking to us at Memo Conversation.
Thank you. This was great. Thank you, Osman.
And to our audience, thank you for tuning in. Please do tune in next time for more Memo Conversations.